what's going on, you sexy bitches? Welcome back to... We've changed the channel name again. Sorry. The Rantin Review here. And there's a couple announcements in this video. But before we get to any of that stuff, I do want to say condolences to the family of the wrestler known as Brodie Lee in AEW, known as Luke Harper, and WWE. John, probably one of the more shocking deaths in wrestling in recent time, because nobody knew that he was sick like that. And at 41 years old, he passed away. There was an announcement was made yesterday, and a lot of cool classiness from the wrestling community for a change. All the AEW versus WWE stuff was put aside for a moment. WWE put up a tribute. Obviously, AEW did. A lot of the places that had worked with, and a lot of wrestlers who had worked for Brodie Lee, John had done so. So that was a shocker. Instagram, his wife had said that it was a non-COVID related lung issue that he had been dealing with for a while. So, unfortunately, he lost that battle. So, rest in peace. Prayers to him and his family, and anybody that knew him, his close friends and everybody else, his kids. It's just, everybody said he was a really good dad. That's like what you see most of what the wrestlers were saying about him. So, we lost a good one. We lost a real talented person. So, yeah, kind of sucks, but yeah, best wishes to his family. Now, another less depressing news item I have to bring up is, again, as I said, if you may notice that the channel's name has changed again. It's now the Rantin Review, and the reason for this is because I'm kind of taking a different course with my YouTube stuff. So before, for those of you who followed me back in the past, I had a movie channel and a TV show channel and a bunch of other channels that reviewed non-wrestling stuff. So I think I'm just going to consolidate it all into the Rantin Review as one YouTube channel, as one podcast, so they all have the same name. And what would just be, so that means we're going to continue, obviously, to review New Japan and AEW and NXT and WWE and so on and so forth. But we will also have on this channel reviews of TV shows, some watch-alongs if I can do them on this channel. In fact, we're going to be starting Death Note and see how that works. And for the thousands of people who have done Death Note on YouTube with the little box and the footage at the bottom, I'm going to be curious to see if that works on this channel, but we will see. And so there'll be that coming up. Of course, it's a new year, 2021. Hopefully there's going to be a lot more entertainment to talk about with all the new Marvel stuff starting up, and finally going back and finally me watching The Mandalorian, which I haven't seen yet, so no spoilers, even though everybody spoiled what happened at the end of season 2 already to me. Sorry, I already know, but so that's where the channel is going to be going in the future. But again, don't worry, if you're a wrestling fan, I'm definitely going to be still covering wrestling as much, maybe more so than I was. So at the title of this video, now that we finally get to what the video's about, that YouTube algorithm is going to look at me and go, bro, just no. But what this whole video is actually about is my year-end grades, the company grades for the pro wrestling companies that I watched during the year 2020, which means this year's grading system is very, very strange because I did not watch much like a lot of people apparently, did not spend a lot of time watching as much wrestling as I would have in the past. And in fact, I can't even grade some of the other companies that I wanted to grade, so I'm really going to keep it to the big three, really four, in my sphere, which will be WWE, NXT, AEW, and New Japan. I could do an MLW review. I could do talk about Ring of Honor. I think they deserve special mention. I watched a little bit of Impact this year, but I don't think I watched enough of any of those promotions to be able to grade their year. And at the top, of course, it's 2020. So with the pandemic, CV, that there were problems with every company having a show. So I guess this is going to be kind of who dealt with it the best and who dealt with it the worst, and where does everybody stand. So the first one I want to talk about, obviously, is the big dogs on the corner, WWE. I think of the companies that I'm reviewing in this video, even within their own company as a brand, I think the main roster, WWE, kind of, in one way, suffered a lot because of the pandemic, but in another way, benefited a lot creatively because of the pandemic. Now, we started this year off, and I know it's hard to remember this, but we started this year off with a Royal Rumble at I think it was 40,000 people at the stadium that saw the Royal Rumble this year. One of the highlights of it was Brock Lesnar putting over Keith Lee without even just touching him by just going, "Who's this mother?" And that was, it seemed like, because that Royal Rumble was actually a fairly decent show and pretty exciting, a lot of people started going, this might be interesting. And then we got another big event in January as well, but we'll talk about that later. But they had an Elimination Chamber, and then the pandemic hit, CV hit, and WrestleMania, which will go down as one of the weirdest WrestleManias ever. In fact, it might be hard for a lot of people to watch that WrestleMania, because I tried to go back for my year-end reviews, and I just got this feeling of, it was the same kind of empty, weird, cringy feeling, that claustrophobic feeling that I got at the time watching that pay-per-view. But, it's not to say that things were bad there. The AJ Styles, and ironically enough, the two matches that were cinematic, or just basically wrestling cinematics and not really wrestling matches, the two wrestling cinematics, Undertaker versus AJ Styles in the Boneyard match, and also, of course, the infamous Bray Wyatt John Cena one. We haven't seen John Cena since in WWE, by the way, if you hadn't noticed. I don't know if that's the end of John Cena. Maybe that really was the end of John Cena. And now the Fiend got burnt to a crisp. Who knows what's going on? Maybe Cena will come back for WrestleMania. But it was kind of downhill for a while for them. WWE had a very hard time with filming wrestling shows and producing wrestling shows without all the bells and whistles. And anybody who's followed me knows I've said for years, and I speculated for years, that a lot of WWE's success is because of all the bells and whistles, and not so much, the core of it, all of the sizzle, and not so much the steak itself. And, if you whittled it down, then they wouldn't be as far ahead. And lo and behold, I never thought it was actually going to happen, but the pandemic hit, and I was like, oh my God, we're actually going to see it happen, because now WWE is not going to be able to have 10,000 people in the arena and go, hey, look how big we are. They're not going to be able to have huge pyro if they're shooting from the Performance Center, as they were for several months. They didn't even know how to shoot a stage like that, because they kept shooting the hard camera towards an audience. And the other companies who had been familiar with indie companies, especially in some of the really scarce indie days about 10 years ago, they kind of knew, from working at Ring of Honor and stuff, hey, if you don't have much of a crowd, point that hard camera towards the stage entrance. You paid all that money for the stage, you might as well put it on camera. And, AEW immediately did that. A couple of the other companies immediately did that. Impact did that. But WWE was like, huh? And it took them a while, but they finally figured it out. It finally turned the hard camera towards the stage for Raw and SmackDown. But it was just little things like that. Like, I think they had the hardest time adjusting to this than any other company. And it took them a while. By summertime, they got the Thunderdome thing. That was somewhat of an improvement for some fans. And fans like me, who were already complaining about all the visual noise in WWE programming anyway, and I can't focus on, I want to focus on the match, but there's all this other stuff flashing everywhere. The Thunderdome was just like overboard. It was just like cocaine. Every time I look at it, every time I would try to watch a WWE show and I turn it on, and the first thing when they showed a shot, it's like so much. It's gaudy. It's like so much. Just throw everything in there. Like, there's 1,000 lasers and 1,000 lights and 1,000 LED screens and just flash things and it's like. And it always goes back to a quote I remember from Quentin Tarantino, who once said, talked about directors like Michael Bay, and they have to throw all of these explosions and noise and crude jokes and stuff at you to try to like stun your system into thinking that something exciting is happening, when actually you're just being hit with visual noise. You're trying to stun people into being excited instead of having the actual content being what's exciting about it. However, I will give WWE credit. By a little past the halfway year point, it turned out that the Sasha Banks-Bayley feud was really, really good. Roman Reigns turned heel, which was probably one of the best things that had happened in WWE the entire year. Had an extraordinary program with Jey Uso, has had a pretty damn good program with Kevin Owens here at the end of the year. Drew McIntyre proved to be a really decent world champion. Edge and Randy Orton had one of the best matches of the year. Not the greatest of all time, but one of the best of the year. And Randy Orton's work this year was really good. The Fiend continued to do Fiend stuff and be entertaining. And Asuka finally got a role in the women's division because Vince McMahon thinks Japanese people's... that's funny because you don't understand what she's saying. it's Japanese. So Vince likes her because he thinks it's funny that this little Japanese woman just like rants on in Japanese, like anybody understands her and nobody does, and that's the joke. Because it is funny, but it's just sad that that's what got Nana has the good run she had in NXT, not any of her history before in wrestling, period. Not the fact that she's very talented and very creative. No, it's that he thinks it's funny a Japanese woman rants and raves in Japanese and nobody understands what they're saying. So, between those things, there were some good pay-per-views, there's some man pay-per-views. It was up and down all year. I'm going to give WWE... Taking into consideration the pandemic, I give him a C. Without the pandemic as being an excuse, I give it a C-. Again, some real improvements as far as the content was concerned, but then I kind of got overshadowed by all of the other kind of emptiness that came on. I would give them a higher grade, if only for the Undertaker Last Ride documentary, but that really isn't. I mean, that's not a wrestling show; it's a documentary. So I kind of want to give them more points for that because that was really amazing. But as far as the run-of-the-mill main roster stuff, that was there, but it does get special mention as being one of the best documentaries I've ever seen. New Japan Pro Wrestling, my personal favorite wrestling organization, even still today, they had a different year. They had a very interesting year of starting out really hot, and ironically enough, they finally did it. They have the highest attended wrestling event of the year because WrestleMania did not have an audience. So the 70,000 people that attended WrestleKingdom, both nights 1 and 2, is the highest attended wrestling show of the year. So I guess a little bit of applause for that. I don't know. That number, although 70,000 people may have beaten what WrestleMania would have drawn this year, I don't know. But we'll never know. But they started out hot with that 2-day WrestleKingdom. People were skeptical about it, but it turned out to be absolutely amazing. A lot of surprises, some really fantastic matches. Match of the year candidates, Tetsuya Naito finally winning the double championship. And we're like, yes, Naito's going to have this run. His first defense is against Kenta. It's a pretty damn good title defense. We're expecting some really cool stuff because in New Japan, January through basically June is when most of the World Championship title defenses happen. And guess what happened? The pandemic comes in, and the wrestling gods go, Naito, you're screwed again. So, poor Tetsuya Naito, his title reign did not go the way he wanted it to go this year. They tried to give it to him. They tried to give him this big, once never done before thing of him being double champion. That started getting some groan from the fans. But then New Japan, of course, shut down from I think it was the end of March up until May, June, and didn't put on a show. Unlike they were unprecedented in that, unlike a lot of the Western wrestling companies and some of the other companies around the world that didn't shut down and shot with empty arenas or whatever. And New Japan, and this is a cultural thing. That's one of the fun things about watching Eastern wrestling and Western wrestling is to see the differences in how they've handled the pandemic. For those of you who don't watch New Japan, over in New Japan, they didn't do what AEW and WWE did. They didn't keep having shows. They shut down for a few months. They came back, had an empty arena tournament for their annual New Japan Cup, which they had to move around a lot. And then they had an outdoor stadium show, and then they finally had an indoor show. They had an indoor show and an outdoor show. They had to cancel their the Wrestle Dynasty show, which I think actually was a good thing. Because honestly speaking, the Wrestle Dynasty show at Madison Square Garden, if it had happened, I don't think they would have cracked 5,000 fans. And that would have been really embarrassing to see 5,000 fans. Because this is still all goes back to the whole Elite leaving New Japan thing and who really drew the first Madison Square Garden show. Was it Ring of Honor in New Japan, or was it the fact that New Japan had the Elite? Is that what really drew all those fans to sell out Madison Square Garden a couple years ago? But they came back from that. They started gradually having fans back, and as of right now, they are the only wrestling company, or only of the Major League Wrestling companies right now worldwide that are having actual thousands of fans attending their wrestling shows. Well, actually, they do. There are some in other countries though, but the ones I'm talking about in this video, as of right now, Yeah, they're the only ones that are having thousands of fans attend their shows, which makes a big difference. And watching New Japan is almost like watching New Japan the way it used to be, and just watching wrestling the way it used to be with fans. But here's the thing about New Japan is that the fans cannot vocalize, so they have to clap and stomp their feet. And sometimes, of course, when something really shocking happens, that they gasp, like El Desperado taking off his mask, which nobody thought was going to happen, and people started murmuring, and it's like, yeah, I know we're not supposed to talk, but holy crap, you know. So those holy crap moments, they make, but the Japanese culture is different than America. Try getting away with that in America, saying, hey, okay, you guys can attend the shows. You have to sit 2 seats apart. But you have to wear a mask and you can't vocalize. American fans not vocalizing at a wrestling show? Yeah, right. So it's just, again, it's just amazing how the differences between the two cultures. As we near the end of the year, some of the bigger flops for New Japan this year are clearly the Evil feud, which I tried to go along with and try to give and say, all right, let's see what happens. And it would have worked, except for the fact that Evil was not very good in his performances in those world title matches, and everybody was sick of seeing Naito and Evil. And then they met again in the G1, and then they met again in October, and it was like, okay, we're enough, or November, and it's like enough of this stuff. We don't want to see another power struggle. We don't want to see another championship match between Evil and Naito. Naito even said he's tired of seeing the match. And yeah, this is just hasn't been the title reign we thought Naito was going to get. We certainly didn't think it was going to be mostly taken up with defenses against Evil, and nobody else really. But it also brought out a bright spot in Hiromu Takahashi, who had a fantastic year considering everything else, and this guy who's just come back. Remember, last year he had just come back from having a broken neck, so he was, really getting his groove back, and then the pandemic hits. But he has stood out a lot more. And overall, most of their shows have been decent. They've been able to salvage better shows than I thought they would, but they still are not like at that level of like what we've been seeing from New Japan pretty much since 2014 up until about last year. The level of excitement and quality and in-ring ability and storytelling that New Japan has had over the last 6 years, it hasn't been quite there this year. Okada's been kind of in limbo, and we'll see in 2021 if they can move on to a new thing. And then, of course, in order to give this grade 2, I'm going to have a little personal gripe with New Japan because of things that have been well documented on my Twitter page and social media. And I'm not getting back into all that again. It's interesting now that seems to have been resolved, as a lot of other content providers are not having the same problems that I had. And some of them are just straight up abusing it. But hey, whatever. All of that aside, as far as New Japan's score this year, I'm gonna give them a B-. Not giving them the pandemic as a crutch, I'll give them a B. Without the pandemic as a crutch, I'll give them a B-. NXT is a hard one for me this year because the real downside of the Wednesday Night Wars that continued on in this year and got hot, then cooled off, then didn't matter at all, is that it's really hurt NXT. And one thing, NXT doesn't have that charm anymore. The charm is lost. NXT being this kind of renegade indie fed inside of WWE, which was always like really interesting. It was operated like kind of like an indie with the WWE budget behind it. And honestly speaking, that was a brilliant idea by Triple H to actually keep that spirit alive and kind of, Triple H has always been good at kind of commercializing being a renegade. They did it with DX and he did it again with NXT. It is still a little commercial though. It always had that commercial tinge to it. And I think the fact that the other company that they're going up against does not have that kind of, this is on the edge, but it's kind of on the edge within a really pre-packaged, made to be sold container, as opposed to what the other guys do, which is a little bit more renegade, balls to the wall. We're just kind of we're kind of rough and tumble over here, and we are kind of doing a little bit of renegade stuff. I think NXT lost that charm as being I guess what people used to call the NXT the overproduced indie. I guess that title now goes over to AEW. But NXT was not, NXT's always had quality in ring work, and at the end of the day, for me, I'm here for the matches, I'm here for the ring work. That's what I'm here for, watch wrestling for. And NXT was solid once again this year. The storylines were not as good this year. They introduced a lot of people. They got hit very hard out of all the big major companies from the Speaking Out scandal, issues with Velveteen Dream, issues with a bunch of the UK guys that were in NXT UK. I'm not going to get back into that stuff. Other companies were affected as too. Obviously, you know, Ring of Honor and Marty Scurll, and Bar Wrestling with Joey Ryan. So those things happened this year. NXT felt a bit of that. But they had solid matches through the year. The War Games pay-per-view is turning out to be one of the better ones every single year. That takeover. And all the takeovers were pretty good, and you had a whole bunch of really great matches. A couple of new stars rising up. Damian Priest, he's becoming a pretty decent star. They've made new stars, but it seems like the old feeling that we got from watching NXT in 2014 and 15 and 16 is it's faded, which, you know, things change, time, you know, nothing stays the same forever. So can NXT find that new spot? They've got to find a spot between their own company and the company that they're competing against, because they're not quite there. They're not quite here either. So where does NXT fall? That's a good question. With all of the talk about NXT expanding and NXT India, and then I get to do the Ginger Bop again, and NXT China, and them having another NXT for NXT, apparently. A developmental, I guess they're having a Young Lions program for NXT, which is a developmental program for the main roster. Whatever happens, I hope they don't muck up what NXT actually is, and actually was the core and the fun thing about NXT was seeing people get a shot on the main stage that probably wouldn't get a shot on the main stage. And even when they quote unquote graduate to the main stage, their track record's not really good. So NXT is probably where most of these people are going to shine the most. But I have to say overall, and by the way, the Adam Cole, Pat McAfee thing is probably one of the coolest feuds of the year, one of the best feuds of the year, probably number one on many people's lists. So overall, NXT, given the pandemic, I'm going to give him a B. And even without the pandemic, I'm going to give him a B. I don't think the pandemic affected NXT because it really didn't. I don't feel that it affected them as much as anybody else. In fact, I think it barely affected them at all as far as the quality and the content and the feel about their show, because nothing really changed. The new boys on the block, AEW, All Elite Wrestling, yeah, they're in this one too. And for the longest time, this is a weird one because this is the first full year we can grade AEW, and as a full-time TV show. And Dynamite has had its ups and downs. There are times that Dynamite were really boring, and there's been times that Dynamite has been amazing, and there's times that it's just been okay, and they've been up and down, which is kind of cool because if every show was awesome, we'd get burned out on it, and if every show was terrible, we'd stop watching it. But AEW is, they're not going to be perfect, and I don't think anybody expected them to be perfect, and I think anybody criticizing them because they're not 100% perfect, they're kind of missing the point of what AEW is doing for the wrestling industry. WWE's audience has kind of fallen off a lot more this year. We talked about the ratings earlier. NXT, they've kind of cut into NXT's audience a little bit, and AEW, even though they were up around the million mark earlier, then they dipped a little bit. Then when NXT wasn't on, they hit the million again, and then they dipped a little bit. And in the past couple of weeks, they've been above 800,000, and the gap between them and WWE's main roster is even closing now. They're beating Raw in the key demographic, a couple times this year. So I'm this whole ratings war. It's interesting, but it's not like as exciting as it used to be back in the day. Obviously during the Monday Night Wars, but what it shows is that there may be a shift coming in the world of wrestling, and don't expect AEW to beat WWE, but I think some guy projected, he did like some sort of calculation as to the trends in the ratings for like Raw, SmackDown, AEW, Dynamite. And he said probably with I think it's either at some point, either in August this year or next year, that their ratings might almost be equal. If you're WWE, you should be terrified about it. As far as AEW itself, the content, again, it's been some good, and there's been some, and there's been some, And, the good thing about them, though, is that when they have, they usually tend to fix it, like within 2 weeks. Boy, there's so many things. Like, the stars have continued to rise. Darby Allin, Jungle Boy's fallen off a little bit, but Orange Cassidy blew up big time this year as well. MJF continues to have his star rise. You have the established stars, obviously the Elite, Chris Jericho, and then they had the influx of the eventual exodus from WWE of people who just got tired of that and wanted to try out AEW because it's a Major League Wrestling company on a major cable network that's getting a large audience to watch your stuff, and you're going to get paid a decent amount of money. So along with Jon Moxley, who came in last year, we had Miro, formerly known as Rusev, in the WWE. The recently laid Brodie Lee came to AEW to head up the Dark Order, which was a brilliant move. His match, which will be probably the last big match people remember him for, the dog collar match against Cody for the TNT Championship. Right, I think now is going to have obviously going to have a lot more meaning, but the match itself was a great homage to the original Piper Greg Valentine dog collar match from Starrcade '83. The TNT Championship itself was established this year. AEW hit the pandemic, and in kind of an interesting way, they had Cody and the Bucks and Kenny kind of coming out to the darkened arena, and they kind of did this little skit, and that was kind of surreal because these guys were just new on the scene, and as a person who's watched from the beginning this whole thing before these guys even knew each other, and that to when they got to know each other, and when, you know, all the way up to this point, it was kind of interesting to see, okay, in their world, how is this affecting these guys over here? And it was, I mean, that was, there's something, again, I guess surreal is the best word. There was something very surreal about it. AEW's also had some pretty excellent matches this year. They had a bunkhouse match that was pretty good. Their cinematics, they had a couple good ones of those. The Stadium Stampede was a pretty good one. Of course, the two matches that stand out to probably most of us this year, outside of Orange Cassidy versus Pac, but would be the Young Bucks against Kenny Omega and Hangman Page at Revolution, and another tag team match, which is the Young Bucks against FTR. Funny enough, that the Young Bucks they're getting a lot of hate from fans now, but they probably are in two of the best matches from AEW this year. Jon Moxley was a decent world champion. They were trying to find a way for him to make that championship the way he wanted to make it and keep it interesting. Some of the feuds I liked, some of them I didn't. He got a lot but I think the good thing about it is he got a lot of people who maybe many people in the national Western audience did not know, like Lance Archer, Brian Cage, Eddie Kingston, and he helped to get them more exposure. And all those guys are very, very talented, although I did have a bit of an issue with the way they handled the Kingston thing, with him not beating anybody in their top 5, which apparently doesn't matter anymore. But, you know, there it is. And speaking of that, now we'll get to some of the negatives. And one of the negatives about AEW is the women's division. Another one is that their top 5 or top 10 list, which the wins and losses matter, but grudges will supersede them, so you don't have to be in the top 10. I got an argument with somebody about this because they're like, well, Brock Lesnar did it in the UFC, and the UFC's a real sport. I'm like, nope, Brock Lesnar beat Frank Mir, who was in the top 10, so that's how come he got him, and he was a marketable name, and that's how he got his title shot. So all of those little things aside, some of the really comedy stuff wasn't great. However, their fashion warfare game is on point. This whole thing with the inner circle of MJF and Chris Jericho for the last half of the year has been absolutely fantastic. Abaddon has come on as finally a female star that people are really taking an interest in. And I think they still are learning their way. But Revolution was a really amazing pay-per-view, and so was Full Gear, a pretty damn good pay-per-view. So, and of course, the Winter Comes thing, the arrival of Sting, Kenny Omega winning the AEW Championship. Finally, the Cleaner is back, and he's gone off now with a shocking partnership with his friend Don Callis from back in the New Japan days, and even back personally for them before that. And now there's a working thing happening between Impact Wrestling and AEW, which I think is just smart business. Thank you again, Don Callis. Kayfabe or shoot. You gotta thank the guy. He's made two of the coolest deals over the last 4 years in wrestling as far as crossing bridges. Of course, originally the Jericho deal in New Japan a couple years ago, and now this shocker of Kenny Omega being the AEW champion, going to Impact the company that AEW has kind of stolen the thunder from as being the number 2 company in North America. So there's some really intriguing things that happen with AEW. I could talk about it all day long, but and of course, singing along to Judas, you got to get. I think they get a point just for that. The Judas sing along has just been one of the more heartwarming things, especially in this year where we really need it. Which I thought by this point it would have kind of played itself out, but I think because of the pandemic, it didn't get played out, and people were just waiting for a full crowd to be able to do that Judas sing along again. So overall, I'm going to give, taking the pandemic into consideration, I will give AEW a B plus. I'll give him a B. I'm gonna give him a B, and I'll give him a B minus. Without taking the pandemic into consideration. There's some things that they shouldn't have done. Some bonehead stuff that came up in the year that knocked it down a little bit for me, because it would have been a B plus, but I had to go back to summertime and that Full Gear show, and some of the stuff that happened around that show, not good. So, but that's overall my grades for this year for all of the wrestling companies, at least the ones that I watch. I want to know what your grades are. Let your voice be heard in the comment box below. If you like this video, of course, hit the like button and the share button. Now, those of you guys out there who like I saw a lot of comments from people who like the wrestling with finance video I did, which is basically me talking about the finances of the wrestling world and then kind of relating them to your personal finances, because I do have a great interest in finances. I am going to be doing a lot more of that on Rant and Review now, because now that this is not just solely a wrestling channel, so I'm going to be doing more of those. Of course, those of you guys who saw that video know that I don't have a paid sponsorship by either of these companies, but I do have affiliate links for Webull, which is a free trading app where if you sign up today, just signing up, you get 2 free stocks by just signing up using my affiliate link. Of course, if you fund that account with $100, you get another 2 stocks that could be worth up to $1,600, and that deal's up until New Year's Eve, and I think they have a new deal probably similar to that coming up in January. Robinhood, of course, many of you probably heard about that. There's an affiliate link down below for that, which you get 1 free stock if you sign up to Robinhood today. There's no requirement on deposit or anything else. You just sign up through the link and you get a free stock, and then you can either keep it, build your stock portfolio, do research, get your feet wet if you're not into investing, or you can just take it and sell the stock and cash out the $6 or $7 or whatever it is worth of stock that you get from them. But that's all for today. I will see you guys as we'll be doing more videos here in my end of the year reviews. The podcast is coming up this weekend, a lot of other stuff. We're going to be doing match of the year, tag team of the year, wrestle of the year, all that good stuff. So stay tuned for more of those videos right here on the Rant and Review. Have a good day.